The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Coloma, California, as Selena Mercer ducked behind a water trough, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. It wasn't supposed to be like this, not again. She'd traveled over 1,000 miles to escape her past, yet here it was, hunting her down like a relentless bounty hunter in the gold-soaked hills of 1852. "Miss, are you hurt?" A deep voice cut through her panic. Selena looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the blazing California sun, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. His hand was extended toward her, steady and sure, while his other rested on the holstered Colt at his hip. "I'm fine," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. She ignored his offered hand, rising to her feet on her own, brushing the dust from her simple blue dress. "Just startled by the noise." "That wasn't just noise, madam. That was Hank Wilson testing his new revolver on old Gilroy's fence posts." The stranger stepped closer, and Selena could now make out his features: a strong jaw dusted with stubble, eyes the color of the river that ran through town, and a mouth that looked like it could smile easy if given the chance. "I'm Patrick Yeager. Most folks just call me Pat." Selena nodded curtly, clutching her small bundle of purchases from the mercantile tighter to her chest. "Selena Mercer. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Yeager, but I really must be getting back." "Back to where, if you don't mind my asking? Haven't seen you around Coloma before." She hesitated, years of caution making her wary. "I've taken a position at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. I cook and clean for the miners who stay there." Patrick Yeager nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Well, Miss Mercer, Coloma can be a rough place for a lady on her own. Allow me to escort you back to Mrs. Holloway's. The men get rowdy when the day's digging is done." "I've managed rougher places than Coloma," she replied, immediately regretting her words. The less people knew about her past, the better. "But thank you for the offer." To her dismay, he fell into step beside her anyway. "I insist. My mother raised me better than to let a lady walk these streets alone, especially with Wilson in one of his shooting moods." They walked in silence for a few moments, the sounds of the boomtown surrounding them, hammers pounding as new buildings went up, the distant rush of water from sluice boxes, drunken laughter spilling from saloons despite the early hour. "You been in California long?" Patrick asked, tipping his hat to an older woman who passed them. "A month. Before that, Oregon Territory." The lie came easily. She'd never set foot in Oregon, but she'd heard enough about it to fabricate a convincing story if pressed. Long journey for a woman alone. "The war with Mexico ended 4 years ago, Mr. Yeager. The trails west are safer now." Selena kept her gaze straight ahead, hoping he would lose interest in conversation. "Pat," he corrected, "and safer isn't the same as safe. Especially for someone who jumps at gunshots like they're expecting one between the shoulder blades." Selena stopped abruptly, turning to face him fully. "Mr. Yeager, while I appreciate your escort, I don't appreciate your assumptions about my character or history. You know nothing about me." His expression softened. "You're right, madam, my apologies." He gestured toward a modest 2-story building ahead. "That's Mrs. Holloway's place, isn't it? I'll leave you here then." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by a surprising twinge of regret. "Thank you for walking with me." Patrick Yeager tipped his hat. "My pleasure, Miss Mercer. Perhaps I'll see you around town." "Perhaps," she answered noncommittally, already turning toward the boarding house steps. "Miss Mercer," he called after her. When she paused to look back, he smiled, and it transformed his face entirely. "Whatever you're running from, it might not follow you here. Coloma's good at giving folks fresh starts." Selena felt her face drain of color. "Good day, Mr. Yeager," she said firmly, then hurried inside without looking back. Mrs. Holloway stood in the hallway, arms crossed over her substantial bosom. "I see you've met our local cattle rancher," she said with a knowing smile. "Fine man, that Patrick Yeager. Built his spread up from nothing after coming back from Mexico with barely more than the horse he rode in on." "I hardly met him," Selena replied, heading toward the kitchen. "He merely walked me home." "Well, that's more attention than most ladies get from him these days," Mrs. Holloway called after her. "Ever since that saloon girl broke his heart 2 years back, he's kept to himself, except for business in town." Selena didn't respond, focusing instead on preparing the evening meal for the 8 miners who boarded at Mrs. Holloway's establishment. She lost herself in the rhythm of cooking, chopping vegetables for stew, kneading dough for biscuits, stirring the large pot over the cookstove. This was safe, this was what she knew. This was why Mrs. Holloway had hired her, despite her lack of references. As she worked, she tried to push away thoughts of Patrick Yeager and his too perceptive eyes. She'd encountered men like him before, men who thought they could read a woman like an open book, who wanted to save her from herself. They were the most dangerous kind. The dinner bell rang promptly at 6, and the miners filed in, washing up at the basin by the door before taking their seats at the long table. They were a gruff lot, exhausted from their day's labor, but they treated her with respect, if only because Mrs. Holloway insisted upon it. "Fine meal, Miss Mercer," said old Mr. Donovan, the eldest of the boarders at nearly 60. "Reminds me of my late wife's cooking." "Thank you, Mr. Donovan," she replied, refilling his coffee cup. "You hear about the stage robbery over near Placerville?" Asked another miner, a wiry man named Harris. "3 men killed, including the driver. They're saying it was the Blackwell gang." Selena nearly dropped the coffee pot. "Those outlaws are getting bolder," Mrs. Holloway commented, passing a plate of biscuits. "Marshal Crawford needs to do something before they decide Coloma's worth hitting." "Crawford couldn't find his own backside with both hands," scoffed Harris. "We need men like Yeager to form a posse. He was a Texas Ranger before the war with Mexico, you know." Selena set the coffee pot down with shaking hands. "If you'll excuse me, I need to check on the apple cobbler," she murmured, retreating to the kitchen. She leaned against the work table, trying to steady her breathing. The Blackwell gang, so close. After all this time, after all the miles she'd traveled, they were within a day's ride. When she'd regained her composure, she returned to the dining room with the cobbler, maintaining her calm facade as the miners continued their meal. But inside, her mind was racing. Perhaps it was time to move on again. Sacramento, maybe, or further south. Anywhere but here, where Patrick Yeager's knowing eyes and the shadow of the Blackwell gang both threatened to expose the truth she'd buried. That night, Selena lay awake in her small room under the eaves of Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, listening to the sounds of Coloma settling into darkness, the last piano notes from the saloon down the street, occasional bursts of laughter, the lonely howl of a dog. Sleep eluded her as memories flooded back, unwelcome and sharp as knives. St. Louis, 1848. The elegant house on the hill. Thomas Blackwell's hand around her throat, the glint of firelight on the letter opener as she grabbed it from the desk. The look of surprise in his eyes as she plunged it into his chest. The blood, so much blood on her hands, her dress, the expensive Turkish carpet. "It was self-defense," she whispered to herself in the darkness. "He would have killed me." But would anyone have believed a dance hall girl over the respected, if secretly cruel, businessman whose brother was the notorious outlaw Jeremiah Blackwell? She hadn't stayed to find out. She'd taken what money she could find, changed her name, and fled west, always looking over her shoulder. Dawn found her red-eyed but resolved. She would give notice to Mrs. Holloway, collect her meager wages, and be on the morning stage to Sacramento. From there, perhaps Nevada territory. Start again. Again, she was the first one downstairs, stoking the cookstove and beginning preparations for breakfast. The routine was soothing, measuring coffee into the pot, mixing batter for flapjacks, slicing salt pork for frying. By the time Mrs. Holloway appeared, Selena had almost convinced herself she was making the right decision. "Morning, dear," Mrs. Holloway yawned, adjusting her cap over her graying curls. "You're up early." "Mrs. Holloway, I'm afraid I must give notice," Selena said, keeping her voice steady. "I'll be leaving on today's stage." The older woman's eyebrows shot up. "Leaving? But why? Have the men been improper? Has someone bothered you?" "No, nothing like that. I simply received word that a relative is ill in Sacramento." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Mrs. Holloway studied her face. "Is this about what the men said at dinner? About that gang? You went white as a sheet, child." Selena looked away, focusing on flipping the salt pork in the pan. "I don't know what you mean." "Listen to me, Selena Mercer. I don't know what you're running from, and I don't need to. But in my 62 years, I've learned that running only gets you so far before the past catches up. Maybe it's time to stand your ground. Before Selena could respond, a knock sounded at the back door. Mrs. Holloway moved to answer it, revealing Patrick Yeager standing on the step, hat in hand. "Morning, Mrs. Holloway," he said, then his eyes found Selena by the stove. "Miss Mercer." "Mr. Yeager," Selena replied stiffly. "What brings you to the boarding house at this hour?" "Came to speak with Mrs. Holloway about boarding one of my ranch hands. Tobias broke his leg yesterday, and he needs a place in town where he can recover without jostling back and forth to the ranch." "Of course we have room," Mrs. Holloway said. "Have him brought over whenever you're ready. Now I need to wake those lazy miners or they'll sleep through breakfast. You'll stay and eat, won't you, Patrick?" Before he could answer, she bustled out of the kitchen, leaving Selena alone with the rancher. An awkward silence fell between them as she continued her cooking, acutely aware of his presence by the door. "I apologize if I overstepped yesterday," Patrick finally said. "I tend to speak my mind too freely." Selena glanced at him, surprised by the genuine contrition in his voice. "It's forgotten, Mr. Yeager." "Pat," he corrected again, a smile tugging at his lips. "Mr. Yeager was my father, God rest him." Despite herself, Selena felt an answering smile form. "Very well, Pat." He stepped further into the kitchen, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "I hear you're leaving on today's stage." Her hands stilled on the spoon she was using to stir the beans. "News travels fast. Small town," he shrugged. "And Mrs. Holloway mentioned it when she stopped me outside. Of course she had. The woman was determined to meddle. It's sudden, isn't it?" Patrick continued. "Especially since you only arrived a month ago." Selena turned to face him fully. "Mr. Yeager, Pat, my comings and goings are hardly your concern." "True enough," he acknowledged, leaning against the doorframe. "But I find myself concerned all the same." His directness caught her off guard. Most men she'd known spoke in circles when it came to matters of interest or affection. "You don't know me," she reminded him. "I'd like to," he said simply. The honesty in his voice made something inside her twist painfully. In another life, perhaps one where she wasn't a murderess on the run, one where the brother of the man she'd killed wasn't closing in with his gang of cutthroats. "I need to finish breakfast," she said, turning back to the stove. "The miners will be down soon." Patrick didn't push. "I understand, but before you make any final decisions about leaving, there's a social at the church Saturday evening. Good food, some dancing, decent company. Might give you a better impression of Coloma than you've had so far." "I'll be long gone by Saturday," she said firmly. "Well, if you change your mind, I'd be honored to escort you." He settled his hat back on his head. "I'll bring Tobias by later today. Good day, Miss Mercer." After he left, Selena stood motionless at the stove, torn between the desire to flee and an unexpected, unwelcome longing to stay. Patrick Yeager was dangerous in a way she hadn't anticipated, not because he might discover her secret, but because he made her want to risk being discovered. By the time the miners tramped down for breakfast, she'd made up her mind. She would stay just long enough to be sure the Blackwell gang had moved on from the area. A week at most. Then she would leave before Patrick Yeager or anyone else got too close, she told Mrs. Holloway of her change of plans over washing up after breakfast. "Changed your mind about your sick relative?" the older woman asked, not bothering to hide her knowing smile. "The stage was full," Selena lied. "I'll try again next week." "MMHMM," Mrs. Holloway hummed, clearly not believing her. "Well, I'm glad you're staying, whatever the reason, and I suspect a certain cattle rancher will be pleased as well." Selena ignored the comment, focusing on scrubbing a particularly stubborn pot. She couldn't afford to think about Patrick Yeager and his invitation, or the way his smile made her feel like maybe, just maybe, Coloma could be more than just another temporary stop on her endless journey. That afternoon, Patrick returned with Tobias, a good-natured young cowhand whose broken leg was set in a crude splint. Mrs. Holloway fussed over the boy, who couldn't have been more than 19, settling him in a first-floor room and promising to look after him like one of my own. Selena kept to the kitchen, but she could hear Patrick's voice as he spoke with Mrs. Holloway in the hallway. "I'll pay double your usual rate," he was saying. "The boy's a hard worker, just unlucky." Horse stepped in a gopher hole and rolled right over him. Nonsense, regular rate is fine, Mrs. Holloway insisted. Though I might ask him to help Selena with some of the kitchen work once he's mobile, keep him from going stir-crazy. Speaking of Miss Mercer, Patrick's voice lowered, but Selena could still hear him clearly in the quiet kitchen. Did she decide to stay? For now, Mrs. Holloway replied cryptically. Though that girl's got one foot out the door at all times, if you ask me, running from something, I'd wager. Or someone, Patrick agreed. Well, I'm glad she's staying, at least for now. Selena moved away from the door, not wanting to hear more. Their perceptiveness unsettled her. She'd thought her mask of calm competence was firmly in place, but somehow both of them had seen through it. She was chopping vegetables for the evening stew when the kitchen door opened and Patrick stepped in. Just saying goodbye, he said. Wanted to check if you'd considered my invitation to the social. Selena kept her eyes on the carrots she was slicing. I haven't decided yet. Well, I'll call for you at 6 on Saturday if you're amenable. If you choose not to attend, I'll understand. He hesitated, then added, I know what it's like to want to outrun your past, Miss Mercer. Sometimes you find it's not as fast as you are. Other times you realize you've been running from shadows. Before she could respond, he'd tipped his hat and was gone, leaving her to wonder which of those situations was hers, and how Patrick Yeager had become so adept at reading the secrets people tried to hide. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. Selena cooked, cleaned, mended, and tried not to think about Patrick Yeager or the Blackwell gang. The miners brought no more news of robberies or outlaw sightings, and gradually her constant state of vigilance began to ease. Young Tobias proved to be pleasant company. Once the worst of his pain subsided, he stationed himself at the kitchen table, helping Selena with tasks he could manage while seated shelling peas, peeling potatoes, even kneading dough when she showed him how. Mr. Yeager's a good boss, Tobias told her Thursday afternoon as they worked side by side. Best I've ever had. Treats his men fair, pays on time, doesn't drink himself mean like some ranchers. You've worked for him long. Selena asked, curious despite her determination to remain uninterested in Patrick Yeager. 2 years now. Came west from Missouri after my folks died of fever. Mr. Yeager took me on even though I didn't know a stirrup from a saddle horn. The boy grinned. He's taught me everything I know about cattle and horses. He seems decent, Selena allowed. More than decent, Miss Mercer. When the gold fever hit and half his hands left for the diggings, he raised wages for those who stayed. And last winter, when Bill Morton's wife and baby died in childbirth, Mr. Yeager paid for the funeral and gave Bill a month's wages to grieve. Tobias looked up from the potatoes he was peeling. He's a good man, the best kind. The simple, earnest assessment touched something in Selena. How long had it been since she'd known a truly good man? Her father had been one before the consumption took him when she was 15. After that, there had been only her mother's second husband with his wandering hands, then the series of men she'd encountered working at the dance hall, some merely crude, others downright vicious. Thomas Blackwell had seemed different at first, refined, generous. Until she'd refused his proposition to become his mistress rather than merely a dance hall girl he visited. Then she'd seen the monster beneath the gentlemanly facade. Miss Mercer? Tobias's voice pulled her from her dark memories. You all right? You went away for a minute there. She forced a smile. Just thinking about what to make for Sunday dinner, Mrs. Holloway mentioned she'd like something special with the preacher coming. It was a flimsy excuse, but Tobias accepted it, launching into a story about his mother's famous chicken and dumplings that had once brought a traveling circuit judge to tears. Selena let his cheerful chatter wash over her, grateful for the distraction from her thoughts. By Saturday morning, Selena still hadn't decided whether to attend the social with Patrick. Part of her, the cautious part that had kept her alive and free for 4 years, insisted it was foolish to draw attention to herself by appearing publicly on the arm of one of the town's most respected citizens. Another part, one she'd thought long silenced, yearned for an evening of normalcy, of music and laughter and the simple pleasure of a man's attentions without fear or calculation. Mrs. Holloway settled the matter after breakfast. "I took the liberty of pressing your blue dress," she announced, hanging the garment on the back of the kitchen door. "It'll need a bit of freshening up, but it'll do fine for the social tonight." "I haven't said I'm going," Selena protested. "Nonsense, everyone goes to the socials. Even my minors clean up and attend, hoping to dance with the few unmarried ladies in town." Mrs. Holloway patted Selena's cheek affectionately. "And you, my dear, could use an evening of enjoyment. You're too young to be so serious all the time. Mrs. Holloway, I won't hear arguments. Besides, Patrick Yeager is a fine escort, and it's high time he started courting properly again. That saloon girl nearly ruined him for decent company." The older woman bustled about, gathering dirty plates. "I'll help you with your hair later. You have such lovely hair, shame to keep it always bound up so severely." Selena sighed, recognizing defeat. Perhaps one evening wouldn't hurt. She could keep to the edges of the gathering, avoid drawing too much attention. And if rumors of the Blackwell gang persisted, she would leave on Monday's stage, regardless of Patrick Yeager and his kind eyes. At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock sounded at the boarding house door. Selena, freshly bathed and dressed in her blue frock, her dark hair arranged in soft curls by Mrs. Holloway's skilled hands, felt her heart quicken as the landlady went to answer it. "Right on time, Patrick," she heard Mrs. Holloway say. "Selena will be down in a moment. Come in, come in." Taking a deep breath, Selena descended the stairs, feeling strangely vulnerable. It had been so long since she dressed for an evening of pleasure rather than practicality. The last time had been that fateful night in St. Louis, when Thomas Blackwell had invited her to his home under the pretense of a dinner party, only for her to discover she was the only guest. Patrick stood in the entryway, dressed in a clean black suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His dark hair was neatly combed and he'd shaved the stubble from his jaw. When he saw her, his eyes widened slightly and a slow smile spread across his face. "Miss Mercer," he said, his voice warm, "you look beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, fighting the blush that threatened to rise to her cheeks. "You clean up nicely yourself, Mr. Yeager." "Pat," he reminded her, offering his arm, "shall we?" The church social was held in the recently constructed town hall, a large wooden building that served multiple purposes in the growing community. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a golden glow over the assembled townspeople. A small group of musicians, a fiddler, a man with a banjo, and another with a harmonica played lively tunes in one corner while tables laden with food lined the opposite wall. Selena felt eyes turned toward them as they entered, and she fought the urge to pull away from Patrick's arm. Being noticed was dangerous, being remembered was worse. "Ignore them," Patrick murmured, sensing her discomfort. "They're just surprised to see me with a beautiful woman. Been a while since I attended one of these things with company." "The infamous saloon girl," Selena couldn't help asking. He laughed softly. "Mrs. Holloway told you about that, did she?" "Yes, Rosalie was her name. Took me for a considerable sum before disappearing with a traveling medicine show. Wounded my pride more than my heart, truth be told. And yet you haven't courted since." "Haven't met anyone worth the effort," he said, his gaze meeting hers directly. "Until recently, perhaps." Before Selena could respond to this frank statement, they were approached by a plump, cheerful woman in a yellow dress. "Patrick Yeager, as I live and breathe." "Haven't seen you at a social in an age." The woman's curious gaze shifted to Selena. "And who's this lovely lady, Mrs. Peterson? May I present Miss Selena Mercer? She's working at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house." "Miss Mercer, Mrs. Abigail Peterson, wife of our town doctor and the best baker in 3 counties. "Flatterer," Mrs. Peterson laughed. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Mercer. We don't get many new faces in Coloma these days, not since the Easy Gold played out. Most folks are heading to the new strikes further north." "I prefer stability to chasing fortune," Selena replied carefully. "Sensible girl. Well, I won't keep you too. The dancing's about to begin, and I'm sure Patrick is eager to show you off." With a knowing wink, Mrs. Peterson moved away toward the refreshment table. "I apologize for Mrs. Peterson," Patrick said. "She means well, but subtlety isn't her strong suit." "It's all right," Selena assured him, surprised to find she meant it. There was something comforting about the normalcy of small-town gossip after years of anonymity. The fiddler struck up a lively reel and couples began to form sets for dancing. "May I have this dance, Miss Mercer?" Patrick asked formally, offering his hand. Selena hesitated only briefly before placing her fingers in his. "You may, Mr. Yeager. Though I should warn you, it's been some time since I danced." His smile was warm. "Just follow my lead, I won't let you stumble." And he didn't. Patrick proved to be a skilled dancer, guiding her through the steps with a sure hand at her waist, his touch respectful but firm. Selena found herself relaxing into the music, into the simple joy of movement. For brief, precious moments, she forgot about Thomas Blackwell's blood on her hands, about his brother and his gang of outlaws, about the constant fear that had been her companion for 4 long years. They danced 3 sets before taking a break for refreshments. Patrick brought her a cup of punch and a plate with slices of Mrs. Peterson's famous apple pie. "You dance beautifully," he told her as they found seats at one of the small tables set up along the wall. "I suspect you've had more practice than you let on." Selena sipped her punch, choosing her words carefully. "I worked at an establishment in St. Louis where dancing was part of the entertainment." She waited for his expression to change, for the familiar judgment to cross his features. Instead, he simply nodded. "Must have been difficult," he said quietly. "Those places can be rough on a woman." "It was what it was," she replied, unwilling to delve into details. "I did what I needed to survive after my father died." Patrick's eyes held hers, and she was startled by the understanding she saw there. "We all do what we must, Selena. No one has the right to judge another's path without walking in their shoes." The use of her given name should have alarmed her, but instead it sent a warm current through her veins. She looked away, focusing on her pie. "You're unusually understanding for a man of your position, Mr. Yeager." "Pat," he corrected gently. "And I wasn't always a respectable rancher, you know. Did my share of things I'm not proud of before and during the war. Learned a long time ago that most people are just trying to make their way as best they can." Before she could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew their attention. 3 men had entered trail dusty, unshaven, with the hard eyes of those who lived by violence. The music faltered as heads turned toward the newcomers. "Evening, folks," said the tallest of the 3, a lean man with a scar running down one cheek. "Don't stop your celebrating on our account. We're just passing through, looking for a bit of refreshment before we move on." Selena felt the blood drain from her face. She knew that voice, that face. Jeremiah Blackwell, Thomas's brother, the leader of the Blackwell gang. Patrick must have felt her stiffen beside him. "Selena, what is it?" She couldn't speak, couldn't move. All she could do was stare at the man who had sworn to hunt down his brother's killer, no matter how long it took, no matter how far she ran. Marshall Crawford, a portly man with a bushy mustache, approached the newcomers. "Welcome to Coloma, gentlemen. I'm Marshall Crawford." "Mind if I ask your business in town?" "Just passing through, Marshall," Blackwell replied smoothly. "Heard there was a social tonight, thought we'd partake of some civilized company for a change. Your names?" "Smith. John Smith. These are my brothers, William and James." The marshal's eyes narrowed slightly at the obvious falsehood, but he merely nodded. "Well, Mr. Smith, you and your brothers are welcome to join us, provided you check your weapons with me for the duration of the evening." For a moment, tension crackled in the air as Blackwell considered the request. Then he smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, Marshal, we're peaceful men." The 3 handed over their visible weapons, pistols, and knives, though Selena knew from bitter experience that Blackwell likely had at least one hideout gun somewhere on his person. "Selena," Patrick's voice was low and urgent in her ear. "Do you know those men?" She forced herself to breathe, to think. "I need to leave," she whispered, "now, before they see me." Without questioning her, Patrick rose and offered his hand. "Come on, we'll go out the back," but it was too late. As they stood, Blackwell's gaze swept the room and landed on Selena. For a second, his expression remained neutral. Then recognition dawned in his cold eyes, followed by a predatory smile. "Well, well," he said loudly, cutting through the murmur of conversation that had resumed. "If it isn't Selena Mitchell, or whatever name you're using these days." The room fell silent as all eyes turned toward them. Selena felt herself trembling, her worst nightmare unfolding in front of her. "You've got the wrong woman," Patrick said firmly, his hand moving to the small of Selena's back, protective and steady. Blackwell laughed, an ugly sound. "Oh, I don't think so. I'd recognize the woman who murdered my brother anywhere, even with her hair all done up pretty." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Selena felt the weight of dozens of stares, the judgment already forming in their minds. "That's a serious accusation," Marshall Crawford said, moving closer. "Miss Mercer is a respected employee at our boarding house." "Is she now?" Blackwell's smile widened. "Ask her. Ask her if she plunged a letter opener into Thomas Blackwell's heart in St. Louis 4 years ago. Ask her if she robbed him as he lay dying." "Selena," Patrick's voice was steady, but she could hear the question in it. She looked up at him, seeing the concern in his eyes, the willingness to believe in her even now. It gave her the courage to face the room, to face the truth she'd been running from. "I killed Thomas Blackwell," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "He lured me to his home on the pretense of a dinner party. When I arrived, I found myself alone with him. He had been a regular customer at the dance hall where I worked, and I thought him a gentleman. I was wrong." The room was utterly silent now, every person hanging on her words. "When I refused his advances, he became violent. He tried to force himself on me. I grabbed the first thing I could, a letter opener, from his desk, and I defended myself. I did take money from his house before I fled, enough to escape, to survive." She turned to face Blackwell directly, years of fear hardening into resolve. It was self-defense. "Your brother was no gentleman, Mr. Blackwell. He was a monster wearing fine clothes." "Liar," Blackwell snarled, taking a step toward her. Marshall Crawford moved to intercept him, but Blackwell shoved him aside with surprising strength. In an instant, Patrick was between Selena and Blackwell, his stance protective but balanced, ready for whatever came next. "That's far enough," he said, his voice calm but threaded with steel. "Stand aside, Cowboy," Blackwell growled. "This doesn't concern you. When you threaten a lady under my protection, it very much concerns me." Blackwell's hand moved toward his boot, where Selena knew he kept a small derringer. "She's no lady. She's a murdering whore who's going to pay for what she did. Everything happened at once." Blackwell drew the hidden gun. Patrick lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. A shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. Women screamed. Men shouted. The other 2 gang members moved to help their leader, but several minors from Mrs. Holloway's boarding house intercepted them, subduing them with well-placed punches. Selena stood frozen, watching as Patrick and Blackwell struggled on the floor. The gun had fallen from Blackwell's hand in the initial impact, but he was fighting with the desperate fury of a man with nothing to lose. His fist connected with Patrick's jaw, sending the rancher reeling back. Blackwell scrambled for the dropped derringer. Without thinking, Selena rushed forward and kicked the weapon away, sending it sliding across the wooden floor. Blackwell turned his rage on her, lunging upward with hands outstretched for her throat. Before he could reach her, Patrick recovered and delivered a powerful blow to Blackwell's temple. The outlaw crumpled, unconscious. Marshall Crawford, who had regained his footing, moved quickly to secure Blackwell with handcuffs he produced from his coat pocket. Several other men were already restraining the other 2 gang members. "Someone fetch Doc Peterson," the marshal called, "and someone else bring rope. These men are going to jail until the circuit judge arrives next week." In the sudden silence that followed, Selena became aware of every eye in the room on her. Some faces showed shock, others disgust, a few with something like pity. She felt naked, exposed, her carefully constructed life in Coloma shattered beyond repair. "I should go," she whispered, turning toward the door. Patrick caught her arm gently. "Selena, wait." She couldn't look at him. "I'm sorry you got involved in this. I never meant for anyone to get hurt because of me." "Look at me," he said, his voice low but insistent. Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. Instead of the judgment or disappointment she expected, she saw only concern. A bruise was forming along his jawline where Blackwell had struck him. "You're hurt," she said, raising her hand to his face without thinking. He caught her fingers, pressing them against his cheek. "I'm fine, are you?" The simple question, asked with such genuine care, nearly undid her. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I've been running for so long, I'm not sure I know how to stop." "Then we'll figure it out together," he said. Patrick, you don't understand. Everyone knows the truth now. I killed a man. I can't stay here. You defended yourself against a monster, he corrected firmly. And yes, you can stay if you want to, doctor. Peterson arrived then, moving briskly to check on the unconscious Blackwell and the other injured parties. The townspeople were beginning to recover from the shock, breaking into small groups, talking animatedly. Selena heard fragments of conversation, caught glimpses of curious glances in her direction. "Let me take you back to Mrs. Holloway's," Patrick suggested. "This isn't the time or place to decide anything." Too overwhelmed to argue, Selena allowed him to guide her through the crowd and out into the cool night air. They walked in silence through the darkened streets of Coloma, his hand steady at her elbow. Mrs. Holloway was waiting up for them, having already heard the news from one of the miners who had rushed back to tell her what had happened. "Oh, my poor girl," she exclaimed, pulling Selena into a motherly embrace as soon as they entered the boarding house. "What a terrible ordeal. Come, sit down." "I'll make tea." "I should pack my things," Selena said numbly. "I'll leave first thing in the morning." "Nonsense," Mrs. Holloway said firmly. "You're not going anywhere, except perhaps to the kitchen for some tea and brandy. You've had a shock." "Mrs. Holloway, the whole town knows what I did now," Selena protested weakly. "Yes, and they also know why you did it. Self-defense is no crime, child. Some won't see it that way." "Then they're fools," Mrs. Holloway declared, steering her toward the kitchen. "Patrick, you'll stay for tea." "If Miss Mercer doesn't mind," he said, looking to Selena for confirmation. She nodded, too exhausted to argue. The three of them sat around the kitchen table as Mrs. Holloway prepared tea, adding a generous splash of brandy to Selena's cup. "Now," the older woman said when they were all settled, "let's discuss this rationally. Jeremiah Blackwell and his men will face the circuit judge for attempted murder, among other charges. With witnesses to his confession about hunting you and his attempt on your life tonight, he'll likely hang or spend the rest of his days in prison." "That doesn't change what I did," Selena said quietly. "No, it doesn't," Patrick agreed, "but it does mean you can stop running." "The truth is out now, Selena. The man who was hunting you is in jail. You're free, free." The word echoed in her mind, foreign and frightening. What did freedom even mean after 4 years of constant fear, of looking over her shoulder, of never allowing herself to form attachments or put down roots? "I don't know how to be free," she admitted. "I don't know how to stay in one place to let people know me, the real me." "I'd like to know the real you," Patrick said softly, "if you'll let me." Mrs. Holloway cleared her throat. "I believe I hear Tobias calling, excuse me." She winked at Selena as she left, not even pretending subtlety. Alone with Patrick, Selena struggled to find words. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why would you want anything to do with me after learning what I've done?" Patrick took her hand across the table, his touch gentle but secure. "Because what you did doesn't define who you are, Selena. It was one moment, one terrible choice forced upon you by a man who gave you no other option. I judge you by the woman I've come to know, kind to young Tobias, patient with the miners, hardworking, brave." "You barely know me," she protested. "I know enough," he replied simply. "Enough to want to know more. If you'll stay, stay." Another simple word that carried so much meaning. Could she really stay in Coloma, face the townspeople day after day, knowing they knew her darkest secret? Build a life here, perhaps even with this remarkable man who looked at her with such understanding in his eyes. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of hoping. Of believing I could have a normal life. Every time I've allowed myself to hope, something has happened to snatch it away." Patrick squeezed her hand gently. "I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen, Selena. Life doesn't work that way, but I can promise you won't face it alone. Not anymore." She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation. She found none, only a steadfast certainty that stirred something long dormant within her. "I don't know if I can be what you want," she said. "I'm damaged, Patrick, broken in ways you can't imagine." "Not broken," he corrected. "Wounded, perhaps, scarred." "But those scars are part of your strength, Selena. They show what you've survived." He paused, his expression softening. "Besides, we're all damaged in some way. I have my own scars, my own regrets, things I did during the war that haunt me still. It's not the same, isn't it?" Taking a life changes you no matter the circumstances. I know that better than most." His expression darkened briefly with old memories. "The difference is I've had time to make peace with my past. You've been too busy running from yours." His words struck a chord deep within her. He was right. She'd never allowed herself to process what had happened, to grieve for the innocent girl she'd been before that night, to forgive herself for doing what was necessary to survive. "I don't know how to stop running," she said again. "One day at a time," he replied. "Starting now." "Stay in Coloma, Selena. Give yourself a chance. Give us a chance. Us." The word hung between them, full of promise and possibility. She looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused from years of ranch work, her smaller but equally marked by labor. "I'll stay," she finally said, the decision both terrifying and liberating. "For now. But Patrick, you should know the townspeople may never accept me after this. Being associated with me could damage your standing in the community." He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Selena Mercer, do you really think I give a damn what anyone thinks? I built my ranch from nothing after coming back from Mexico with everyone expecting me to fail. I've never cared about standing or reputation, only about living honorably according to my own conscience." His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "And my conscience tells me that you are worth any amount of gossip or disapproval." His certainty was contagious, kindling a spark of hope she'd thought long extinguished. "Then I'll stay," she repeated, firmer this time. "And we'll see what happens." The smile that lit his face was like sunrise breaking over the Sierra Nevada, powerful, transformative, full of promise for the new day ahead. News of the confrontation at the social and Selena's dramatic past spread through Coloma like wildfire. By Sunday morning, every resident knew the story or some version of it, and opinions were sharply divided. Some, particularly the women who had experienced or witnessed men's capacity for violence, sympathized with Selena. Others, especially those who valued propriety above all, were scandalized by her past as a dance hall girl and her admission of killing a man, regardless of the circumstances. Selena faced the whispers and stares with a quiet dignity that surprised even herself. Having spent 4 years hiding her true identity, there was a strange relief in having nothing left to conceal. She attended church that Sunday with Mrs. Holloway and Tobias, holding her head high as she walked down the aisle to a pew near the back. A few women moved away as she approached, but others nodded in greeting, even making space for her to sit. Patrick met them outside after the service, dressed in his Sunday best, his hat in his hands. He greeted Mrs. Holloway and Tobias warmly before turning to Selena. "Miss Mercer," he said formally, aware of the curious eyes watching them. "I hope you're well this morning." "As well as can be expected, Mr. Yeager," she replied, matching his tone. "Thank you for your concern." Mrs. Holloway rolled her eyes at their formality. "Oh, for heaven's sake." "Patrick, we're having Sunday dinner at 1 o'clock. You're welcome to join us if your ranch can spare you for a few hours." "I'd be delighted, Mrs. Holloway," he accepted with a smile. "I'll return at 1 then." As he turned to leave, Abigail Peterson approached their small group, her expression determined. "Miss Mercer," she said, loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "I want to thank you for the apple cobbler you made for the social last night. Before it was interrupted, I had a chance to taste it. Perfectly balanced spices. I'd love your recipe if you wouldn't mind sharing." It was a small gesture, but its significance was enormous, a public acknowledgement, an offer of normal, friendly interaction despite what everyone now knew. Selena felt tears prick at her eyes. "I'd be happy to share it, Mrs. Peterson. It was my mother's recipe." Mrs. Peterson smiled warmly. "Wonderful. I'll stop by the boarding house one day this week." She nodded to Mrs. Holloway and moved on to speak with other parishioners. "Well," Mrs. Holloway said, beaming like a proud mother, "that's a start." And it was. Over the following days, Selena discovered that Coloma was divided in its reaction to her past, but not as universally condemning as she had feared. The miners at the boarding house were almost uniformly supportive, having already come to respect her for her cooking and her quiet dignity. Several of the town's women, led by Mrs. Peterson, made a point of treating her normally when they encountered her at the mercantile or on the street. There were those who snubbed her, of course. Mrs. Harrison, the banker's wife, crossed the street rather than pass Selena on the boardwalk. The owner of the millinery shop asked her to leave when she entered to purchase thread. Young mothers pulled their children closer when she walked by, as though murder might be contagious. Selena endured it all with a composure that grew more genuine with each passing day. The world hadn't ended. She hadn't been run out of town or arrested. And with every hour that passed without her having to flee, the knot of constant fear that had lived in her chest for 4 years began to loosen, just a little. Patrick visited the boarding house daily, sometimes just for a few minutes to check on Tobias, other times staying for a meal or taking Selena for a walk along the American River that ran through town. They spoke of simple things at first: the weather, the seasonal tasks at the ranch, books they had read, places they had seen. Gradually, their conversations deepened. Selena found herself sharing memories of her childhood in Ohio, of her father's kindness and her mother's beautiful singing voice. Patrick told her about growing up in Texas, about his time as a ranger, about the horrors and rare moments of grace he'd witnessed during the war with Mexico. A week after the social, the circuit judge arrived in Coloma. Jeremiah Blackwell and his men were brought before him on charges of attempted murder, assault, and for Blackwell, being a suspected member of the notorious gang that had robbed the Placerville stage. Selena was called to testify about the events at the social, and more painfully, about what had happened in St. Louis 4 years earlier. She sat in the makeshift courtroom, actually the same town hall where the social had been held, and recounted in a steady voice the details of that terrible night. How Thomas Blackwell had invited her to his home, how his manner had changed once they were alone, how he had attacked her when she refused his advances, how the letter opener had been within reach as he pinned her to his desk, his hands at her throat. "And after you stabbed Mr. Blackwell, what did you do?" the judge asked. "He fell to the floor. There was so much blood. I checked for a pulse, but there was none. I knew he was dead." Selena swallowed hard. "I was terrified. I knew no one would believe a dance hall girl over a respected businessman like Thomas Blackwell, so I took money from his desk, about $300, and I ran. I've been running ever since. Until Mr. Jeremiah Blackwell found you in Coloma," the judge prompted. "Yes, Your Honor." "Until then." The judge, a weathered man with shrewd eyes, studied her for a long moment. "Miss Mercer, are you aware that Thomas Blackwell had a reputation in St. Louis, that you were not the first young woman he lured to his home?" Selena shook her head, stunned. "No, Your Honor, I wasn't aware." 3 other women came forward after his death, describing similar experiences. They were fortunate enough to escape before things went as far as they did with you. The St. Louis authorities concluded that his death was justifiable homicide. There was never a warrant issued for your arrest. The revelation hit Selena like a physical blow. I didn't know. I always assumed I was wanted for murder." "The only one hunting you was his brother," the judge said, glancing toward Jeremiah Blackwell, who sat glaring at Selena from the defendant's table, "and he did so against the law." After Selena's testimony, Patrick took the stand to describe the events at the social. Marshal Crawford followed, confirming Patrick's account and adding details about the capture of the Blackwell gang members. Several other witnesses from the social corroborated their stories. In the end, the judge's verdict was swift and decisive. Jeremiah Blackwell was sentenced to hang for attempted murder and as the leader of the Blackwell gang. His 2 accomplices received 20 years each in the territorial prison. The execution was scheduled for the following morning. As they left the town hall, Patrick offered Selena his arm. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I think I will be," she answered, surprised to find it was true. "I've spent 4 years believing I was a fugitive, that what I did was unforgivable, to learn that I was never even wanted for a crime. It's difficult to comprehend. You're free, Selena, truly free, not just from Blackwell, but from the guilt you've been carrying." They walked in companionable silence toward the boarding house, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the dusty street. "I don't want to watch the hanging," Selena said suddenly. "Is that wrong of me?" Patrick shook his head. "Not at all. Witnessing more death won't heal what's already happened. Besides, I was hoping you might join me for a ride tomorrow instead. A ride. I'd like to show you my ranch, he said. It's about 5 miles outside town, nothing fancy, but it's home. The invitation felt significant, a step beyond their walks and conversations in town. I'd like that, she replied, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The following day dawned clear and bright. Selena rose early, dressing in her simplest skirt and blouse, practical for riding. Mrs. Holloway fussed over her as she prepared to leave, pressing a basket of food into her hands, just in case you get hungry out there. Patrick arrived promptly at 9, leading 2 horses, his own sturdy buckskin gelding and a gentle-looking bay mare. "This is Daisy," he said, patting the mare's neck. "She belongs to my foreman's wife, but she's happy to let you borrow her for the day. She's smooth-gaited and well-mannered." Selena approached the horse cautiously. "It's been a while since I rode." "Like dancing, some skills stay with you," Patrick assured her, helping her mount and adjusting the stirrups to fit her. They rode out of Coloma at an easy pace, following the road that wound through pine-covered hills. As they left the town behind, Selena felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The open country, the fresh air, the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her all combined to create a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in years. "You're smiling," Patrick observed, riding beside her. "Am I?" She touched her face, surprised. "I suppose I am. It suits you." They continued through rolling countryside, Patrick pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. After about an hour, they crested a hill and Patrick reined in his horse. "There it is," he said, gesturing to the valley below. "The Circle Y Ranch." Selena took in the view, a sprawling complex of buildings nestled in a green valley. A 2-story house of weathered wood stood as the centerpiece, surrounded by various outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. Cattle grazed in the distance, and a creek wound through the property, glinting in the sunlight. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. Patrick's expression softened with pride. "It's not much compared to some of the big spreads, but it's mine. I bought the first 100 acres with my army pay after Mexico, added more land as I could afford it. Now we run about 500 head of cattle and 30 horses." They rode down into the valley, and Selena noticed details she hadn't been able to see from above a vegetable garden beside the house. Chickens pecking in a fenced yard, wildflowers planted along the front porch. Several ranch hands called greetings as they approached, eyeing Selena with curious but respectful interest. Patrick introduced her to his foreman, Bill Morton, the man whose wife and baby had died in childbirth. Selena recalled, and a few of the other hands who were working near the house. "Come inside," Patrick invited after they'd stabled the horses. "I'll show you the house." The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable. Wide windows let in plenty of light, and the furnishings, though not fancy, were well made and solid. Patrick showed her through the downstairs rooms, a spacious kitchen with a large cookstove, a dining room with a table that could seat 12, a comfortable parlor with bookshelves lining one wall, and his office, where ranch business was conducted. "It's a fine home," Selena said, running her hand along the kitchen table. "You've built something wonderful here, Patrick. It's missing something, though," he replied, watching her closely. "What's that?" A woman's touch. "A family." He moved closer to her. "Laughter, children. The things that turn a house into a home." Selena's heart quickened at the implication in his words, but she forced herself to speak practically. "Surely there are plenty of suitable young ladies in the area who would be happy to provide those things. The daughter of a neighboring rancher, perhaps." Patrick shook his head. "I'm not interested in suitable young ladies, Selena. I'm interested in you." "Patrick, be reasonable. I was a dance hall girl. I killed a man. Half the town still crosses the street to avoid me. I'm hardly the ideal wife for a respected rancher." "You're exactly the wife I want," he said firmly. "Strong enough to survive whatever life throws at us, brave enough to face the truth even when it's painful, kind enough to show patience to an awkward young cowhand with a broken leg, and beautiful enough to take my breath away every time I look at you." He took her hands in his. "I know it's soon. I know you're still adjusting to the idea that you don't have to run anymore. I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm just asking you to consider a future here. With me." The intensity in his eyes made her tremble. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not of you, but of believing in this, in us. I've spent so long protecting myself, never allowing myself to hope for more than survival." "I understand," he said gently. "Take all the time you need. I'm a patient man, Selena." "I'll wait." They ate the lunch Mrs. Holloway had packed in the shade of a massive oak tree near the creek, talking of lighter things, his plans for expanding the herd, her ideas for new dishes to serve at the boarding house. As the afternoon waned, they mounted up for the ride back to Coloma, both reluctant to see the day end. Halfway back to town, they stopped to rest the horses beside a small pond. Patrick helped Selena dismount, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. When her feet touched the ground, she remained within the circle of his arms, looking up at him. "Patrick," she said softly, "I don't need more time." His eyes searched hers. "What are you saying, Selena?" "I'm saying that I've spent 4 years running from life instead of living it. I don't want to waste another day being afraid of happiness." She took a deep breath. "If you truly want me, despite everything you know about me, then my answer is yes." Joy transformed his face. "You'll marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, "though God knows what people will say." "Let them talk," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "I only care about our future together, Selena, not your past, not what anyone thinks, just us building a life together." When his lips met hers, Selena felt something inside her heal, a wound so old and deep she'd forgotten it was there until the pain began to fade. His kiss was gentle at first, then more insistent as she responded, her arms sliding around his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Patrick rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Selena Mercer. I think I have since the moment I saw you hiding behind that water trough," she laughed, a sound of pure happiness. "And I love you, Patrick Yeager, despite my best efforts not to." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Coloma. Mrs. Holloway insisted on hosting a modest reception at the boarding house afterward. To Selena's surprise and Patrick's satisfaction, most of the town attended. Even those who had initially shunned her seemed to have softened their stance, perhaps influenced by the judge's revelation that she had never been wanted for a crime, or perhaps simply by the obvious devotion between her and Patrick. "Mrs. Yeager," Patrick murmured as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. "How does it feel?" "Unfamiliar," she admitted, "but wonderful, like coming home after a very long journey." "That's exactly what it is," he said, drawing her closer. "Welcome home, Selena." In the years that followed, the story of Selena Mercer and Patrick Yeager became something of a legend in Coloma. How she had fled from a violent past, how he had stood by her when the truth was revealed, how they had built a life of quiet happiness at the Circle Y Ranch. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl who grew up knowing their mother's full story, taught by their parents that honesty and courage were more important than appearances, that true strength lay in facing the past rather than running from it. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch work was done, Patrick and Selena would sit on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over their land, their hands intertwined, grateful for every day of the future they had built together. Any regrets? Patrick would sometimes ask, looking at the remarkable woman who had become his wife, his partner, the mother of his children. And Selena, thinking of the long, lonely years of running, of the fear that had once consumed her, would squeeze his hand and answer truthfully, "Only that I didn't find you sooner."